Good morning. Come on in. Get your coffee. Thumbs up. How's everybody doing this morning? Does everybody have post-election hangover yet? Or are we over that? When will the protests end? We'll talk about that in a minute. Good morning, good morning. Come on in. Yeah, I saw Trump's tweet addressing the protesters and saying he appreciated all the, what was it, all the passion for America or something like that? Lots of work to do, you're right. We'll get to that in a minute. It's got to be job one today. How to heal the country. Everybody on board? A lot of Latinos are afraid of getting deported. Yeah, that's scary. Coffee machine is working fine. Protests won't end soon. All right, let's talk about the protests. Did everybody see my blog today? Blog today was, I'll just reiterate for those of you who are far too lazy to read blog posts before I come onto Periscope. I'm sure you have better things to do. So, I think a lot of women were crying after the election results came in because they said to themselves, this is a big defeat for women. We wanted women to, break the glass ceiling, and, we thought it would be the year of women. But I would contend, as I've said before, just for background, that Clinton already broke the glass ceiling, because I just read a list of 24 reasons on CNN.com. They had 24 reasons that Trump won, different theories about why he won. And of the top 24 reasons that Trump won, how many of them had to do with gender? 0. All right, let me say that again. This is CNN, and the top 24 reasons that they collected from other people for why Trump might have won, none of the top 24 included gender. It just wasn't there. So So if the top 24 reasons don't include gender, and guess what? I think you could have gone to 50 reasons, and you wouldn't have run out of reasons. They would all be wrong, but you'd have 50 reasons why you won, and none of them would be gender. None of them. It's not even part of the conversation. So if that's not a broken glass ceiling, I don't know what is. Ask any 6-year-old, boy or girl, 6-year-old, and say, can a woman be president? And they'll look at you like you're crazy. It's like, duh, of course. So while clearly it would be better for women to have a woman president, nobody thinks it can't happen. They're just waiting for the right one. But there's a bigger story here. So while everybody was looking at the Democratic side, and Clinton in particular for their role model for women, things weren't going that well, because although she was doing great in terms of how high she rose in the hierarchy of power, her brand wasn't that clean. She had a lot of allegations against her for one thing or another. So it turns out that as a brand for women, as something to get behind and say, yeah, there's a role model, she never was really perfect for that, right? And she was imperfect at best, but I give her all the credit for breaking the glass ceiling at the highest office, because I think she did that. You have to give her credit for that. But meanwhile, over on Trump's side, you had Kellyanne Conway just performing, just being the most capable, one of the most capable humans you've ever watched work in public, right? I mean, because you watched what happened, before she was there. You watched how he changed after she came on. You saw how his message got sharper and better. You saw that he behaved better. Just everything was better after Kellyanne Conway took over. That's not a coincidence. I mean, I'm sure Steve Bannon gets some credit as well. Yeah, I don't know exactly what their relationship was, but he stayed behind the scenes wisely, and let her be the voice, and I imagine the biggest influence. So while you were looking in the wrong direction, one of the best role models for women in power and effectiveness and just every positive thing you could ever think about a human being was all happening on the other side, right behind you. And it was happening at the highest level, because you can't get much higher than, campaign manager for the person who wins. And at the same time, Katrina Pearson had been extremely effective as a spokesperson from the beginning, operated at the highest level, nailed it from beginning to end. I mean, she was just incredible from beginning to end. And then what about Ivanka? Talk about a role model. I mean, she's literally, is there anything she can't do and do well? Looks like it. It looks like there's everything she tries, she does well. And so it's easy not to look in that direction, because those are three ultra effective women, ultra successful, super smart, did everything right for a year, right in front of you while you were watching, and you still looked in the other direction. Yeah, how about Ann Coulter? How about Ann Coulter getting everything right from the beginning to the end? All right. What about that? Right from beginning to end. So I would argue that, maybe the media spin on this is that it's a somewhat disappointing year for women. But I think only if you're facing the wrong direction. As soon as you turn around and see what's happening on the other side, it's the most successful, role model-wise, it's the most successful year of all time for women. And I would say that Kellyanne is going to be a legend from here on out. So anyway, that's the good news. I hate to be the bearer of good news, but that is some really good news and shouldn't be ignored. At the same time, we're seeing some whispers on Twitter and some stories coming out that Trump is at least considering Peter Thiel as part of his transition team. Now, and there seems to be some interest there. So I don't know what the real story is there. Chris Christie is apparently in charge of the transition team, but he's got his own, baggage with the Bridgegate stuff. And I don't know what happened with Bridgegate, but as long as the public is suspicious, it's problematic. Now, Peter Thiel, as you know, is famously a gay man who's a billionaire and very successful, extraordinarily smart. I met him once, liked him a lot. And he might be part of the transition team. Now, if you're a gay LGBTQ person in this country, and you see that, as far as I know, for the first time ever, you might have an out gay man as part of the transition team, building the actual team that will probably be the most important influences on Trump and his decisions. Now, has there ever been, just the fact that Thiel is in the conversation, right? And, I would expect that whether he leads the effort or he's just involved with it, he's going to have a big influence. But when did that happen? Ken Blackwell, leading what team? But has that ever happened before? Has there ever been a member of the LGBTQ crowd, who was out anyway, leading a presidential transition team? Yeah, not openly. But the openly makes a difference, doesn't it? So think about that. Think about what's already happened. Trump has, I tweeted, must have been a year ago, I tweeted that Trump would probably destroy. Christina, you can make noise if you want. Yeah, you don't have to be quiet. I tweeted that Trump would destroy the Republican Party and remake it in his name, and he did. And I cleverly said at the time, this is a year ago, one party down, one to go. And he destroyed the Democratic Party. There's really nothing left of it. People are actually asking who's even in charge of the Democratic Party. He destroyed both Democratic parties, or both political parties, as I predicted. He also transformed, if not permanently damaged, the mainstream media. I don't think you've ever seen anything like this in terms of trust. And he also destroyed credibility of the pollsters, which you could argue are part of the mainstream media indirectly. So these are things that the public wanted. In a way, they wanted the party hacks not to be running things. They wanted something fresh. So if you're asking how would Trump do as a president, part of the answer is to look what he's already done, because it's like he's been the president for months. He's gotten rid of two political parties. He's made the mainstream media less trusted, which I would argue is a good thing. It makes the public less gullible, at least in that small way. And don't trust the polls either, which is probably also a good thing. And then, in terms of role models for women, the three best examples we saw come out of the election, in my opinion, were all involved with his campaign. Kellyanne Conway, Katrina Pearson, and Ivanka Trump. And I think you'd have to give props to Melania as well, who didn't come out of this, unfortunately, with as clean a resume, because she got attacked pretty viciously. But in terms of grace and just respectability, she was a big winner too. And then if Peter Thiel gets more involved in the transition team, you're going to have to ask yourself, does that look like a bad sign for the LGBTQ community? Probably not. All right. So what we have left, and this was the topic you all wanted to talk about, is the protesting going on. Let's look on the bright side. All right. Let's start by looking on the bright side. Not much violence. A lot of that has to do with the fact that Trump supporters have quite cleverly, smartly, wisely stayed out of the picture. They just sort of just got out of the way. It's exactly the right thing to do. All right. There has obviously been a little gloating, a little celebration from Trump supporters, but I think you'd have to say that compared to how much there could have been, it was really reserved. Think about it. Think how big a deal it was that Trump won against all odds. Think about how big his rallies were. Think about how much energy he creates. And then, against all odds, he wins. And then look at how muted the celebrations were on his side, right? So this is the artist in me who looks for, the empty space, because usually the story is in the things that don't happen, right? While you're watching the things that do happen, and it was the same example with, Clinton and trying to break the glass ceiling. While you were looking at that, the real story was the stuff you weren't looking at, which is, Kellyanne Conway, Katrina Pearson, Ivanka Trump, really just hitting it out of the park for women, collectively. So sometimes the story is the thing you're not looking at. And if you look at the protests, your focus goes on all the energy, the activity, the things that are happening, right? But I would argue the biggest story is what's not happening. What's not happening is half of the country are Trump supporters, and they just shut the fuck up. Half of the country said, yeah, we are a little bit embarrassed by, the claims of racism and, the bad reputation we got along the way. We're a little bit embarrassed for people within, the Republican Party who are the ones putting on, the serious racist shows, we're embarrassed. People are embarrassed by it. And you're seeing not a lot of gloating. You're really not seeing that. And think about the maturity in that. I mean, I hate to be the optimistic one all the time, but think how much maturity there is on the Trump side. Think about the self-control that they're not engaging people in the street. We are largely respecting them because the Clinton side, I think, did get screwed, but largely by their own side. And I think both sides require a lot of credit for restraint. The protests are just that. It's a show of emotion, and it's a show of strength. And I think in both of those cases, they're completely justified. I think people should show their emotion because both sides need to see it. Trump supporters were a little cagey because part of the reason that it was unexpected that he win is that Trump supporters weren't showing their emotion so much. They were just waiting until it was time. They were just sort of waiting until it was time to vote. But I would say, we're all better off if we know what the other is thinking, right? And I, for one, think it's a positive thing to see all these people protesting because I want to know how they feel. So should you. And then maybe we can do something about it. Smug lives matter. So I'm going to be on CNN today, y'all. I'm going to be on Jake Tapper's show. It's 1 p.m. my time is the start time, and in TV terms that means sometime between 1 and 2. Probably closer to 1. But that's Pacific time. So Eastern Standard Time would be 4 p.m. today. Likewise, I will be back on CNN on Monday at about the same time, and I'll give you updates on that. Oh, don't be such haters against Jake. I like Jake a lot. So the other thing I want to say about the election is that, remember a year ago I said that the facts wouldn't matter. I told you that policies wouldn't matter in the end. And in the end, no one was talking about facts or policy. In the end, if you asked somebody when they left the voting booth, why did you vote? They might have given you some policy-based reason, but really it wasn't about that. It was about how you felt about these candidates, and moreover, what you thought they were thinking. Or as I like to put it, in the end, we weren't really voting for either of the candidates. We were voting for or against the imaginary future that each of them had crafted, both for themselves and for the other. So we had left reality entirely, and we were voting completely on imaginary items. So I'm not going to break your spell entirely today, but let me just make some generalities. From the beginning, Trump was never as dangerous as the other side said, not even close, if he was dangerous at all, and I don't think he ever was dangerous. But from the beginning, Clinton was never as crooked as you thought she was. Everything about the election was turned from something that was real and something that, looked and felt sort of real-ish, or something you suspected was real, or something you feared might be real, sort of low-level suspicions. And they were hyped up and amplified to the point where you lost all control of your rational thought. And that's everybody, both sides. Everybody just lost their shit for a while. And we went into full cognitive dissonance, full imaginary worlds, where one side was fighting the second coming of Hitler, which wasn't real, never was even close to real, never was even slightly real. But in people's minds, that's what they were fighting. And the protesters are still, to some degree, fighting that imaginary war that never was real. But likewise, on the Trump side, people were fighting this imaginary war against corruption of unprecedented standards. And I gotta think probably it was corruption of normal standards. I'm not going to tell you that Clinton was free of corruption or influence buying and selling, but it might have been a normal amount for a politician. It got blown out of control. Christina, she's trying to watch me on Periscope while I'm talking right next to her. So keep in mind that everything you believed in the past month, and I don't even think this is an exaggeration. I think almost everything, I'll say almost, I think almost everything you believed about both candidates was false. It was so exaggerated beyond any sense of reality that it was just two imaginary people having a contest against them in our minds. There was nothing about reality that ever happened in the last several months. The rallies were real, right? The emotion was real. The way people felt was real. But what they were thinking about it was entirely imaginary. And so, to that point, the things that the protesters are worried about, the things they're afraid of, are also largely imaginary. They imagine that Trump supporters are represented by the Klan. That's about as not true as anything could possibly be. They imagine that American citizens will be deported because they've got a pigmentation difference from Trump, which is ridiculous. It hasn't been in anybody in power anyway, anybody's plan. Sure, there's some nuts in the party. There will always be some nuts in any large group, but they don't define the Trump supporters. Everybody has an opinion. So, as I said before, I said a year ago that Trump would change more than politics. I said that he would change how you see the world. He would change our view of reality. And as I mentioned, and I'm really fascinated by this, CNN's compilation of 24 different reasons that have been given for why it is that Trump won in the end. Now, if I've taught you anything, let's see if anybody remembers this lesson. What does it mean when you have 24 different explanations for why something happened? You tell me. Let's see if anybody's been paying attention for the last year. What do you know is true when you have cognitive dissonance? When you have 24 explanations after the fact. So the after the fact part is the important part, right? Yeah, cognitive dissonance. Bingo! All right. If this election ended and pundits said, yeah, there are one or two explanations for why this happened. The polls are wrong. I'm just giving you an example. Or one of the scandals toward the end made a difference. If you had heard maybe one or two reasons and they look pretty reasonable, that's probably not confirmation bias. That probably means that honest people looked at the situation and came to the wrong conclusion. They just didn't predict right. That would be a normal, rational thing that might happen. But when you have 24 different reasons, and by the way, when I read that list, I thought, well, this is incomplete because I can think of a few more reasons that people have given that aren't even on this list. When you have that many reasons, it's always cognitive dissonance because people are just, they're seeing something that can't be true, and so they're reinterpreting their reality on the fly to make it make sense. And a lot of the explanations just don't pass even the first sniff test. They're just crazy stuff. And that's another tell for cognitive dissonance. Now, let me take you back a year again for those of you who were with me. Do you remember a year ago that I made a big deal and I was saying that I was going to predict what would happen as opposed to explaining it after the fact? And I told you that I was going to predict instead of explaining because, why did I say that? Why did I tell you it was so important that I was going to predict the future with the persuasion filter instead of waiting to see what happened and then explaining how it fit all the facts. Why did I tell you that a year ago? Credibility, yes, that's part of it. I told you that because you could know in advance that there would be lots of rationality or rationalization after the fact, and that everybody's theory would fit the facts after the fact. But before the fact, none of those fit. It's because no one had enough confidence in any of those 24 factors to use them as a basis for prediction ahead of time. All right? I was the only one who said, this is such a strong variable, in this case, Trump's tools of persuasion, just the talent he had for it. That variable was so strong that I was going to predict this outcome all the way through the primaries, all the way through the end, based on one variable. And I told you that I was going to do it as a prediction because I would have no credibility if I waited until the end, like everyone else did, and said, hey, my pet theory, one of 24 of them, fits the facts. Because guess what? All 24 of those explanations fit the facts. They all did. They all fit some kind of statistical truth. All right? If this doesn't change your sense of reality, I don't know what will. Because, in physics, there's this concept where a particle's, I guess its spin and its location or whatever, isn't set until somebody observes it or measures it. It's the weirdest thing about reality, that things don't exist until you measure them. So how you measure things makes a big difference. Douglas Adams, yeah, I didn't know he talked about hypnosis. Nate Silver. All right, so let's give, while we're in our period of healing here after the election, let me give a shout out to Nate Silver. We've all had fun making fun of Nate's projections from beginning to end. But let's face it, this wasn't like any normal election, and there won't be another candidate, in all likelihood, who has this sort of persuasive power, who can break every predictive model. That's a very unusual situation. But as Nate said in a recent article, one of my Democratic friends forwarded to me, that we were only within a percent or two of things going completely the other way, if that percent or two had happened in the right states, the swing states, or even the ones that weren't supposed to be swinging. So he was wrong, but he was only barely wrong. History is going to look at him like he was a complete screw up and missed this thing from the beginning to the end. But if you looked at the final results, he only missed it by this much. All right. I mean, if we're being the least bit objective, he barely missed it. Okay. He missed it. He was wrong. I was right. It feels good, but he barely missed it. All right. So before you pile on, and before you ignore everything he says from this day on, you should take into account that Trump was sort of the black swan event, I guess. I know I'm misusing that term, so forgive me, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, for misusing your term. The orange swan. By the way, whoever it was that said orange is the new black, when describing Trump, who's described as orange, as replacing Obama and ironically the White House, was very clever, and I feel bad that I didn't think about it first. Who are we talking about? I think if you look at my past predictions, and predictions in which I didn't use either I didn't use the persuasion filter, or we didn't have a big persuader in the race. I think I got them all wrong, right? All my past predictions on presidents and whatnot. But the persuasion filter was relevant this time because you had a master persuader in the race. For what it's worth, I did predict that Bill Clinton would win twice, and I did predict that Obama would win twice because they're also master persuaders. But when you don't have one of them in the race, I'm just sort of guessing. And I got better. Yeah, I've been saying that to people online. You probably saw it, that when people say, hey, what about those predictions you did in the past that were wrong? To which I say, apparently I've got better at predicting. Doesn't that happen when people predict? It's like any other skill, right? You practice, you get better at it. Now, to be fair, and I hate to, blow all of your illusions here, but as someone pointed out on Twitter, and other people will point out as well, somebody was going to be right about this race. And in every event, there are going to be contrarians, and you see this more in the financial world. For everyone who says the stock market's going up, there's always going to be a few people who say, no, it's going to crash tomorrow. And if it crashes tomorrow, the black swan event happens, we're going to think, oh, that one person who guessed it right is some kind of godlike creature. But the truth is, there were people guessing all kinds of things, and someone was going to be right. So before you assign godlike predictive abilities to me, keep in mind that someone was going to be right. Right? Someone was going to be right because people were predicting everything. Someone was going to be right. It doesn't mean they knew. It just means someone was going to be right. Now, I showed my work ahead of time. I showed my work all the way, and I predicted. I didn't explain after the fact. So I think my credibility should be given a little extra edge because of that. But the fact is, someone was going to be right. And, and when that person was right, they were going to say, well, it's because I thought of it this way. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the case. I'm going to sign off now because I got a lot to do before I go to CNN. You might want to watch me there. Jake Tapper interviewing sometime between, I'll give it to you in Eastern Standard Time, sometime between 4 and 5. It tends to change. I also might get canceled if there's any big news, because I'm what you would call a low importance guest. I think I get to come on like the off-peak hours. Sort of a filler. Holiday filler. I think that's what I am this time. So don't be surprised if I get canceled, but you'll see the clip after the fact anyway. All right. Let's see if I can do a smooth... Yeah, watch this. I'm going to do a smooth sign-off because I'm ready now. I prepared it in advance. So, everybody, thanks for joining me on Coffee with Scott Adams.